Welcome to the Commonwealth Matters. I'm your host, Richard Nelson, Executive Director of the Commonwealth Policy Center. Drag queen performances are becoming more common across the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And of course, this has alarmed many parents and citizens who are concerned about the effects that these shows have on their community and especially their children. Now, a bill has been introduced in the Kentucky legislature by State Senator Lindsey Tichenor to classify drag shows as sexually oriented businesses that should be restricted. To talk further about this issue and joining us regarding the bill is State Senator Tichenor. Lindsey, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
So when I was preparing for this program, I was gleaning some headlines from across the state and the country regarding drag performances. And the very top one that came up on my Google search was from PBS NewsHour. And I think you can probably guess the political slant on that right off the bat. But this was the title, and I want to read the first paragraph. It says, "Political rhetoric, false claims obscure the history of drag performances." That was in October 30th of 2022, just a few months ago. This is what it begins. The first paragraph says this: "Lately, drag has been dragged through the mud. The art form has been cast in a false light in recent months by right-wing activists and politicians who complain about the sexualization or grooming of children. Opponents often coordinate protests at drag events that feature or cater to children, sometimes showing up with guns. Some politicians have proposed banning children from drag events and even criminally charging parents who take their kids to one." Now, of course, Lindsey, that is a perspective from the far left on this issue. You have a different perspective, and quite frankly, for the record, I have a very different perspective on this issue as well. But is it possible? Let's start with that first sentence. Is it possible to drag through the mud? Give us your perspective on drag performances, and you're well aware of this.
Yeah, like they are correct. They are correct. Like they said, drag has been around for a long time, but drag has never been pushed in front of children before. And I think, as they say, we're coming after it. We're trying to restrain them coming after our kids. There's never been a time in history when drag has become family friendly and intentional reach to be in front of children. And that's where I think most of us who are opposed to it are saying, hey, wait a second here. We've never had any regulation around this before because we've never had to. Yeah. You've never tried to get to our kids before. And now the effort is obvious that you are. Yeah. And we're seeing this from across the country, different states dealing with these issues. There's 15 at this point, it could be more by now, but there's 15 legislatures that have put forward bills to put some guidelines around drag and the exposure to children. But we are seeing it in Kentucky as well. There are, brunch story hours, drag shows that are happening really in places of business that are public accommodations. They're happening in public parks. A lot of issues in Owensboro right now that community members have been fighting that. So when we looked at this, we can deal with this on a county basis, but I think it's just safer to put some regulation around it on a state level. And in doing so, we are broadening to just go ahead and put regulations around the adult-oriented businesses on a state level because it's never been at the state level before. It's always been done per county, and you're well aware of that fight. You could probably elaborate on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So to that point, I was involved almost 20 years ago helping local governments enact restrictions regarding sexually oriented businesses, porn shops, strip clubs, peep shows, that kind of thing. And it was because the state legislature would not enact a statewide bill. There were real issues with these. I even hate to use the word adult-oriented businesses. They're sexually oriented businesses, and with them come a lot of negative secondary effects. Right. You see increased crime around these businesses. You see prostitution. There are cases of public intoxication. There just behavior that is not conducive to civil society. And so I had worked with another organization to take a model ordinance county by county and to talk about this issue, to talk about their vulnerability without an ordinance like this. And we gave them the model ordinance. And Lindsey, within, it was about 4 years, 116 out of 120 counties had enacted that ordinance. So that was between 2004 and 2008. Fast forward to our day, here we are in 2023. There still is no statewide ordinance regarding this. One thing I want to note about drag performances is that, as you mentioned, they've always been around. Perversion has always been around. Sin has been around since Genesis chapter 3. But what we're seeing with drag events is it's going mainstream and it's going public. That's what we're seeing in Owensboro. We've seen it in Bowling Green last year, where you have these sexualized and provocative performances in public spaces where children are present. We just saw in the Grammys the very controversial performance, satanic, to put it frankly. And it was led by 2 transgender people, very sexually provocative, very inappropriate for anybody's consumption. And yet that kind of thing, again, we're talking pop culture. We're talking about an awards program where something that was just considered beyond the pale 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it's going mainstream. So you have introduced Senate Bill 115 that says any businesses that host drag queen events, that they would be considered adult-oriented businesses. Are you, well, let me just take one step back. I'm interrupting myself. I'm sorry. I just need to give some more background about you. Many of the listeners know that Commonwealth Policy Center engages in elections, and we interview candidates before we endorse them. And when you came into our office and went through the questioning process and the endorsement process, you shared with those on that panel a flyer that you had. And on one side of the flyer were some excerpts from the book Genderqueer, which promoted homosexuality. It was obscene. It was awful what I saw. There's no other way to put it. On the other side of that flyer, there was a call to action, asking parents to come to the Jefferson County Public School Board meeting to raise their concerns. Now, this is important because this is before you got into office. You were concerned about what was going on in the schools. You were concerned about minors that were being harmed with obscene material. And your involvement with the drag issue is really an extension of what motivated you before you were ever elected. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started, myself and another group of parents started really putting a lot of effort into it, finding out what's going on in our schools within Oldham County, Jefferson County, and other school districts. And we're able to find a long list of books that hold within them very obscene materials. And by definition, from our KRS statute 531 of obscenity, they meet that standard. And now that's a criminal statute. So if I were to take that book as just a citizen and I'm walking on the street and I hand that book to a kid, by that statute, I could be arrested for distributing pornography. Yet those books are allowed to be in our schools because they have deemed them educational. So one of the bills I put forward this year, Senate Bill 102, includes within it an obscenity portion to no longer allow for those to be characterized as educational, and therefore get them out just based on that KRS statute that already exists. And so, when I met with you, I guess that was last summer, drag wasn't on my radar at all. It wasn't a piece of legislation that had been brewing, that I've been thinking about. But the more and more I got exposed to seeing people posting videos and hearing about different events that were popping up all over the state and all over the nation, I realized we've got to deal with this issue as well. And it's shocking to me, the opposition that I've had over both bills, that people actually want their children to be exposed to it. They have some defense for it, and I can't quite put my finger on why they can defend those things. And I think it just shows how much we've been desensitized as a culture to these issues. And there's a clear effort to desensitize children, even young as they can. And some of these books, one that we found in our district, thankfully our district, when we made them aware, they got it out right away. It was for fourth graders, and it was incredibly obscene. But going back to that obscenity issue, there was a parent in Jefferson County who brought genderqueer before the school board and went through it. It took 8 months, followed the process that was in place, that Jefferson County had in place, followed all of the steps, did everything right, come to an appeals hearing, and they heard the appeal. They heard the attorney speak out against it based on the KRS statute, and they said the book still had educational value. So an 8-month-long process that parent spent with an attorney, and it's still there today. So something isn't right in the statute that we have, or in the exemption to the statute that we have. And we need to clarify that and make sure parents have a process to actually get this stuff removed if they feel it is obscene. And there's, like I said, there's a long list of books that have obscenity in them.
Yeah. Law is one way to address what's going on, and the law should protect children at a very basic level, protect them from exploitation, protect them from obscenity. And there are laws on the books that protect children in any number of ways.
Right.
I know that we do have a law somewhere that talks about contributing to the delinquency of a minor, and you cannot but think that pornographic books, obscene books, contribute to their delinquency. It down moral barriers. It desensitizes them. It introduces subject material that they're not ready for.
Right.
I'm going to link this back into the drag shows and connect it to something else that's going on in the world of drag, if you will. And that's the drag queen story hours. We have seen this kind of come on the scene in the last few years, where you have drag queens, it's typically men dressed as women, going into public libraries, and they're reading children's books to kids that really it's not appropriate for them. Does this bill affect that? Does this bill address drag queen story hours?
Absolutely. It's a public location. So one of the important parts of our bill is that it is going to put a distance where these performances are being held. And they can't be anywhere within, and we're kind of going back and forth right now on what the distance should be, but at this point it's 1,000 feet from a public library. So that kind of takes care of it. Anywhere that children could be, whether it's a park, school, childcare facility, it's going to put that distance set to regulate how close they can be to those areas. And public library is one of those. The public library thing is interesting because there was an article actually in the Courier Journal last month, maybe, talking about Drag Queen Story Hour, and Kentucky has the largest chapter in the nation of Drag Queen Story Hour.
I didn't know that. So do you have an idea of what libraries these are taking place in?
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, it's not just libraries. It's all over the place. I mean, you got libraries, you got they actually had one event happening at Champs Roller Dome. Can you imagine going roller skating one day and taking your family, and then that's going on. So there's a lot of different places, but they said they have kids as young as 3 and 4 years old. And again, my question I cannot get the answer to is, why do kids need to see it? Why children? Why now, when drag has never been marketed to children, is it so strongly being marketed to children and heavily defended by people who want to get in front of kids? And I cannot find anyone to give me that answer.
Lindsey, have we just lost a collective moral compass to the degree where nothing is right or nothing is wrong? It's just up to the individual. Are you sensing that and let me rephrase this. Is it, okay, Lindsey Tichenor has a problem. Maybe some of your constituents have an issue with this, but what about the parents who don't have a problem? What about the families that think that this is perfectly okay for their children? Is that what's going on?
Well, to some degree, yes. To some degree, parents want to expose their kids to it because they think it might bring about inclusivity, diversity of, thought or whatever. But I do worry that we may have gotten past a certain point. But if you look at our current statutes that exist in Kentucky to protect children, when do you start picking those away? When does the parent get to decide they can abuse their kid? When does it, of course, we're not going to remove those types of protections for children. So this needs to be an area that we also protect children. And I think it's really, it's a very slippery slope of allowing this to happen when the influence is so strong on a child's brain. When they're 3 and 4 years old, they have no idea. They don't understand those things. Personally, as a woman, I've never really thought of myself as a feminist at all, but I'm so shocked that the feminists aren't upset over this, because this is not painting women in a good light. It's a mockery of us. It demeans us. And you're teaching a 3 and 4 year old that women should be objectified in that way. So I don't understand where the disconnect is from all the feminists in wanting to protect womanhood in itself. But I don't know, maybe there's a new breed of feminism coming around, a conservative version.
If you're just joining us, you're listening to the Commonwealth Matters. I'm Richard Nelson here with State Senator Lindsey Tichenor. We're going to take a break and we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to the Commonwealth Matters. I'm Richard Nelson here with State Senator Lindsey Tichenor. And Lindsey, just before the break, you were talking about where the feminists were when it comes to feminism, and essentially that drag makes a mockery of womanhood. But also true feminism, I would say, would defend children. True feminism would protect their innocence and protect their development and have moral guardrails or any kind of guardrails around them. And if I could put it this way, I think, it's very clear that there are many laws that protect children, their health and their safety. I mean, my goodness, we have seatbelt laws and booster laws. I think kids have to wear a helmet when they're riding a bike. There's all kinds of laws in place to protect our children's health. But when it comes to protecting their innocence and to put moral guardrails around them, all of a sudden it's a free-for-all, right? Yeah. And we're saying, and I truly am trying to get my mind around how it's ever a good idea to break down those moral barriers that are there when, again, just it seems like 5 or 10 years ago, most parents would say it is not appropriate for a man dressed in drag to come and read to 3 and 4 and 5 year olds, nor is it appropriate for pornographic books to be in our public schools that promote adult child sex, pedophilia, which is what's still allowed in the Jefferson County public school system. That is indefensible. So I want to bring it back to your bill. You have this bill that's going to restrict drag performances. We know they're taking place across the state. We know that many parents are objecting to this, especially when it comes to children. What kind of, I want to go into some of the objections before that the opponents to this bill have, before I go into the consequences for this if it's ever enacted. So is this not a free speech issue? Some will say it's artistic performance and it's all done in fun and you can't restrict a First Amendment freedom that we have. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's, they're free to do it. We're not saying they can't. We're just saying who they can do it around. It's about eliminating and prohibiting as much as we can the negative secondary effects on a community. So it's free speech. Free speech has always been upheld in the Supreme Court, any case that comes before it, but there are always some guidelines to where they can limit and restrict free speech, and that is to decrease the secondary negative effects. And we believe strongly that this can cause secondary negative effects within a community.
And perhaps long-term negative effects when you see how children are negatively impacted by this because their moral barriers are removed. maybe more prone to sexual activity at a younger and younger age. And most parents want to delay that, ideally for Christians.
Yeah.
Judeo-Christian tradition is taught that sex should wait until marriage. And by the way, there are a lot of good societal benefits when that happens.
Mhm.
But we've lost that ideal. So we posted a commentary on the Commonwealth Policy Center Facebook page about this issue. I
Okay.
posted something in particular about what's going on in Owensboro. I think we may have had a picture of one of the drag queens that were performing,
Mhm.
and got a lot of attention.
Yeah.
But here's one of the comments I want to share with you. Um, so somebody that chimed in the comment section on our Facebook page said this: do you really want to live in a world where the government can tell you what to do on your own time? I thought Republicans didn't co-parent with the government. If your children are going to this filth, that's a parenting problem. Now, by the way, that was from a Republican candidate for the state house from last year. Uh,
Interesting.
so yeah, I happen to recognize the name, and this
Hmm.
person obviously was against any restrictions on the drag shows. How do you respond to this? And what caught my attention, Lindsey, was I didn't think Republicans thought that Republicans didn't co-parent with the government. Let's handle that, deal with that. Is this
No,
co-parenting with the government?
no, I don't think so. This is obviously like we've said, it's a protection for children, just like we have in other statutes. If a parent thinks, punching their kid across the face is a way to discipline them, the state says, hey, wait a minute, that's actually not okay. Like, we have some statutes in place to protect children from those types of poor decisions that parents can make, or that kids get themselves any type of environment where they can be in danger. If the parent is not there to protect them, which naturally they should be, then the state has those regulations. We've had those things in place forever. And I don't believe it's co-parenting. I understand his sentiment as we walked through the COVID nightmare, and schools would not let me have an exemption for my child, or, all of that. I understand where that's coming from. But this is a different issue. This is a long-term negative impact that can affect a child. We know there is a trafficking issue across our state. I work with different organizations that try to help youth who are being trafficked. And I think when you break down that sense of innocence, and open them up to these ideas and of sexual things before they're able to protect themselves, it just opens that door where they could fall into that type of situation. And we want to prevent that from happening. I don't know why any parent wouldn't want that to have some protections to prevent those things from happening.
Yeah, just to add to that, the parents that I'm aware of in Owensboro in particular, they're concerned because the drag queens are coming out of this bar. There's a public-private partnership. There's a Riverwalk Center area there, and there are parents walking along the river and going to the parks and the restaurants, and drag queens are coming out, and their very young children are exposed to this. So
Right.
there is a parenting issue, but the issue is that parents are concerned about this coming into their community and their children
Right.
being exposed to this.
Right. We don't want them exposed to it on purpose or on accident, And I think, just having some standard put in place to make sure that those things are in the proper location, in the proper venue where children aren't exposed to it. And like you said, we had one of the senators here was talking about, he went to a restaurant and had no idea he's there with his family and there's a drag show going on. So his kids got exposed to it and he didn't even know. It's just a restaurant, So we got to think about that too, because if there are no restrictions on it, and it can be any place you want, a parent may not want their kid to see it, but they are forced to because they show up at the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right. Here's a quote. So I'm going to try to have an understanding of how. So let me set it up this way. We live in a day and age where people are able to define their own reality, if you will. Transgenderism is mainstream. The idea that you can transcend your biological sex is accepted. We hear terms like, I'm able to finally be my true self. You might not agree with it, but that's your truth. Here's my truth. And we have a difficult time accepting that there is the truth. But here's the perspective of a drag queen from Covington, Kentucky. Their stage name is Lady Phaedra. And they were interviewed for a story related to this banning of drag shows. But this is what Lady Phaedra says. I remember being the scared young person myself. Drag queens are the first people we encounter who demonstrate to us that it's okay to be who we are. It's okay to be different. It's not only okay to be different, it's fabulous. How do you address this sentiment that it's okay to define my own reality, to be transgender? And this person is, I think, identifying as transgender as well, not just drag. But the perception, here's where I'm going. The perception is that you and in groups like the Commonwealth Policy Center that favor this legislation, that we are against transgender people, that we're against certain kinds of people. How do you address that?
Well, I disagree with it. I think that maybe we need another show just to talk about the transgender movement. But I think we have very vulnerable children who some may very well be uncomfortable in their bodies. I was uncomfortable in my body when I was going through puberty. I think most people are. Yeah. And to be introduced to something at a time when they are vulnerable, uncomfortable, and this becomes this idea that could possibly be a saving thing for them. And I think we will very quickly see the after effects of this social contagion, which I believe is what it is, when kids who have tried to go through the process to change their gender into something that it's not, the truth is a stubborn thing. It's going to reveal itself over time. And I think what the after effects of that are going to be quite heartbreaking and staggering when we get through it. And as far as drag and the transgender movement, I think it's interesting because before trans became a popular mainstream idea, drag was never considered trans. And now, those two have kind of come together as one and the same, which they never were before. Drag was drag. It was all on its own. And I think when you look at someone who is transgender and they have a transgender female that a man is now living as a woman, they don't necessarily look like drag. I mean, drag is very different and unique in its own thing. It's like I've said before, it's caricatured. It's everything bigger and bolder and for performing, lots of makeup, big hair, big bright costumes, and it's different. It's different, but for some reason, those two are now, the argument is that it's one and the same. And I'm not sure I've ever heard that argument before until I filed this bill.
You're learning a lot.
I'm learning a lot. Yes.
Lindsey, we are out of time. I wish we had a little more time to talk about this, but I appreciate you on a personal level for advocating for children and for public decency. And to really, you are motivated by goodwill. There's no animus. I know you personally. You are for healthy communities. You're for protecting children and their innocence. And I think that is to be commended. So I appreciate you in your work on this bill. Best to you as you work on this.
Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.